Welcome to episode 93 of the Half Point Per podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and producer, Johnny Pham. Guys, we have a big show this week. We've got some playoff talk. I know it may seem a little early because we're still a couple weeks out, but it's never too early to start prepping for playoffs. And now is the time when a lot of teams might be clinching those spots. And thinking ahead to the postseason. Dalton, how are you doing on this fine night?
I am doing great. The NFL still does not make sense, but we get a Bengals Kansas City Chiefs matchup this weekend, and I am ready for revenge Mahomes.
I hope so. I hope it goes better than the last time I thought we were going to get revenge Mahomes against the Bengals. Johnny, how are you?
Doing good. Excited that playoffs are just around the corner. It feels far away, but I'm sure in a blink of an eye it'll be here very shortly. And looking forward to hopefully represent us in the playoffs and not losing the first round is the goal.
Okay, you're talking about fantasy playoffs right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Dalton is also going to be in said playoffs.
He doesn't count to me right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
In fact, I am the returning champion of that league, so I did well represent us last year.
That part I didn't remember, but I did.
No one really recalls that one.
Let me change my name back to champs in the league.
Oh, okay, that'd probably be
instead
good.
of what? What was your other name? Do you want to say that out loud?
We're the Overland Park Priests. No relation to location.
What was the team before that one called? We can just circle back this whole time.
Okay, let's probably not get this podcast canceled by somebody who actually cares about this kind of thing. Like I said, we've got some good playoff primer stuff for this podcast. Dalton and I are each going to give a couple of playoff strategies that you guys should think about either ahead of the playoffs or obviously during the playoffs. And we'll talk about more of the actual during playoff strategies during that time, but just things to keep in mind as you go and kind of build your roster. And then we're going to try and identify some league winners. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot during the season. It is probably one of the more popular draft terms when you're doing your research in July and August. This guy could be a league winner. Now we're to the point where we really have to start thinking about who could the league winners be, and we're going to have a league winner who's already a starter, a bench guy, and a guy off waivers. So it'll be a different tier of guy for each, and then we'll close out with a little who's that Pokemon, just to get some fun nuggets in on a couple of guys around the league. But Dalton, I'll hand it off to you for your first playoff strategy that you'd like to share with us.
Well, this is a pretty popular one, and I think you and me probably both have this one. But it's getting around that time that you need to start dropping those bench guys who you're never going to start for handcuffs.
Yep. I had this one number one because, like you said, I knew that we were both going to have it, and we could definitely talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, a good example, even going into last week, it was probably time for the really good teams to start dropping ancillary bench guys, like a second tight end, even you should probably not have at this point. Mm-hmm. And if you had went and picked up Zonovan Knight, who was a very popular waiver wire pickup this week, that would have been a guy who should be on your radar. In Kansas City, Jerick McKinnon, even a shot at Melvin Gordon, going across the league, Tyrion Davis-Price and Jordan Mason. You want to just try to see which guys.
You didn't mention Tevin Coleman in that mix, who I'm sure will probably get some carries because
he's just Kyle Shanahan
eternal. And yes, we all hate Kyle Shanahan. I saw somebody on Twitter, I think it was Brett Coleman, but I don't want to say definitively, but it was a football analyst who basically predicted that Shanahan was going to get fired by the end of next season because basically I think they were just so annoyed that he had, that one goal line sequence where it's like, oh, Kyle Juszczyk, Jawan Jen, everybody but Debo, Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey, here's your chance to score a touchdown, and they did not score a touchdown.
Yeah, well, I didn't know this just on the Shanahan talk. They've had the easiest schedule in the NFL, easier than the Eagles, which is pretty hard to do. But yeah, I think for the playoffs, if there are guys on your roster who you're not going to start, I know this year because of the schedule change, there are two very annoying buys for fantasy teams, that being the Cardinals and the Packers. So you're probably going to want to keep some of those teams. But if you're
those guys are the first week of the playoffs, right?
The week before, the first
week before. I was okay.
But
if you're a double week playoff, then it could be the first week of your playoffs.
And if you're playing for a bye, like maybe keep some of those guys. But if you're in the playoffs and you kind of know what spot you're getting at this point, you need to start, like if you're holding
like Greg Dortch.
Yeah, Greg Dortch off your roster. Any tight end who's not starting off your roster. Any tight end who's not Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews off your roster.
Well, even a guy like you've been stashing, even though he's shown promise lately, like Sky Moore. Like Sky Moore probably isn't doing a ton for your fantasy team in the playoffs. I understand that one may make you a little crazy because he's getting more time with the Chiefs right now, but they've also had a banged up receiver room. But just like receivers in that ilk too, that because a lot of times if there's a receiver injury, it's not that running back is a 1-for-1 fantasy points, but there's a reason why running back handcuffs are so much more valuable. They step into more of the starter's workload and points and production and all of that than receivers ever do and probably ever will. And just to really hammer that point home, I took a look at the championship week last year at the top 20 running backs in week 17. There were guys like, I had the list. There it is. Rashad Penny, the overall RB1. Darrell Williams, who was the RB3. Ramondre Stevenson, who was not the Ramondre Stevenson of this year. He was very much in a committee, if not slightly behind Damian Harris, who was also a top 20 running back that week. So big week for the Patriots. Boston Scott, I think, was the RB6 that week. A.J. Dillon, Deontay Foreman, Jair Patterson, remember him? I don't think he's even done a single thing this year, but he was a top 20 back. Ty Johnson, Dontrell Hilliard, Chuba Hubbard, and then you have Daria Gumbawale was the RB21, so just on the fringes. So that's a lot of guys who were not on your radar. Some of those guys were, but a lot of those guys not on the radar for a lot of the season, and they come through and give a top 20 performance to help win leagues. So that's why this is such an important strategy and an important thing to really be looking at now, while some of them may be still on your waivers.
Yep. And one guy I'll throw out there who is probably still on your waivers and is not a running back, but I do think has some of that league winning upside is Jameson Williams. He is going to be back very soon. And I know we did say you're not going to hold those pop receivers, but this guy, I mean, if he takes over that deep threat role in the Lions offense, and if Amon St. Brown continues his unfortunate injury stretch, there's a really good likelihood that he's a highly valuable player.
Yeah, although I would still say that I would prioritize a handcuff running back over him. But if you have the roster spot, I can definitely see pulling that off. I don't want to name too many just handcuff backs because I think we're probably going to get to some of them as we go on throughout the show. But a couple that jumped out to me that I wasn't going to talk about later. You mentioned Melvin Gordon. I thought at least throw him out there now. He's on the Chiefs. We just have no idea. He's at least a stash and hold. Jerick McKinnon as well has been playing plenty, but probably still out there for a lot of teams. I mean, Dontrell Hilliard, he's almost certainly out there. James Cook is getting used more since the Nyheim Hines trade, which is the exact opposite of what we thought was going to happen. He's actually, believe it or not, Dalton, it's not unrealistic for him to actually finish the top 40 running back and win me that bet, which I would not have thought a couple months ago. That just shows it doesn't take much to do that, number one. And number two, he actually has been getting more involved lately. And if something were to happen with Singletary, he could get interesting. Or he's a rookie who has been playing more as the year's gone on. He could just get interesting, period, even if Singletary is still around.
I know it's coming because it looks like it is, but that just really doesn't encapsulate the way the season's been for fantasy. It just makes no sense. The Bills went out and traded for Nyheim Hines. James Cook is now getting usage. I do think last game, James Cook had two very bad missed opportunities, but I think they were just rookie missed opportunities. But you're right. That could be a guy too. I mean,
There are a lot of guys who could be a guy, and that's why this is so hard. And more than likely, you're going to go pick up a couple guys, and the starter in front of them will not get injured, so that opportunity will not arise. Or you'll pick up a guy, and he actually will get a chance, and he'll stink because a lot of these guys aren't very good. They wouldn't be available and backups if they were if they were very good or if they had shown much to this point. But I think the main thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about who you want to pick up is try to look for guys that are like one injury away from a plug and play top 20 guy. Like there's backfields that would be crowded if there are injuries, and then there's other backfields where number one, the situation of the team is good. Number two, you kind of know who the backup is. There's higher end examples of that you can't go pick up. Kareem Hunt, Alexander Madison, Samaje Perine, although maybe Perine's seemingly always out there at some point. Maybe someone drops him with Mixon coming back this week. And AJ Dillon kind of falls into that category too. You probably can't go grab those guys, but a lot of these other guys, I think you can.
Well, and even popular earlier in the season, Raheem Mostert was out last week.
Yeah.
He's behind Jeff Wilson, who does not have a good history of staying healthy. Neither does Mostert. But he's a guy, too. The immediate startable position right there if he ends up getting the role if Jeff Wilson goes down. And I'm sure he's available.
I'll give my second one here. So obviously to drop the bench receiver or just the useless bench player, the guy you were stashing kind of for running back handcuffs. That was both of our first ones. My second one is just to look ahead at matchups and specifically for your streaming candidates. Like obviously it's great if you have a Derrick Henry, who I believe has the easiest playoff schedule of any running back, just looking at teams, what they've given up. But it's not like Josh Jacobs has a hard schedule, so you're benching Josh Jacobs. Which, by the way, shout out to Josh Jacobs, 300 scrimmage yards. The guy actually legitimately hurt his calf on Friday. I think it was more unsure than we realized at the time whether or not he was going to play. Hurt it again during the game, and then only went out and ran for 86 yards to win the game. Just unbelievable stuff from him. But anyway, my number 2 is to look ahead at matchups, and specifically when it comes to your streaming candidates. The Athletic put out a really good strength of schedule article today that if you have an Athletic subscription, I would recommend you go take a look at that. Actually, I think it was yesterday. So it was on Tuesday when this came out. Basically, they just broke it down by position, and it's a very clear picture for week 13. And then for the playoffs, what positions have the easiest schedule. Kind of some takeaways from that. The easiest quarterback schedule down the stretch is Mike White's New York Jets.
Oh, my God.
So Mike White could be a thing down the stretch. Sam Darnold and the Panthers, also a pretty easy quarterback schedule. I'm a little more queasy about Darnold, but that perhaps applies maybe more to DJ Moore. But looking at running back, the Titans.
Well, can we just go back to that real quick, Evan?
Yeah.
Can you advise our listeners of whether or not they should start Sam Darnold? Let's go ahead and get that one out there.
I mean, no, you probably shouldn't, but
there's always a but.
Depending on who your quarterback is, if you're in a position, which you obviously are, if you're looking to pick up Sam Darnold, where you're streaming and you're just trying to hit matchups, I'd have to pull up their exact playoff schedule here, but there may be a week in the playoffs, especially if Darnold plays well these next 2 weeks, where you may have to leave it in his hands because maybe you have Kirk Cousins playing in prime time in a bad matchup and you don't want to go down in flames that way. So yeah, it's tough. And I think Mike White is the more realistic one. He plays the Lions, Jags, and Seahawks the last 3 games. You're going to have more of a sample size. It's not going to be as good as it was this first game. You're going to see these next couple of games if it is sustainable. At least you'll have a better idea than we do now. But he's interesting, and also the Jets, obviously, by and large, are interesting down the stretch too. But Titans and Saints have the 2 easiest schedules. That's maybe you're still giving Alvin Kamara a chance because you probably have to, and just praying and hoping for the best. The Browns have the second toughest schedule. That doesn't make you back off Chubb. Maybe what it does is make you back off Kareem Hunt, who has not been, a worthwhile starter this year, kind of quietly. And the Texans, it's tough sledding for them in the playoffs. Maybe Dameon Pierce has to show you something these next couple of weeks, or he might be a guy that you leave on the bench in the playoffs and until he has a good game, pretty much. But yeah, I just think you should look ahead to matchups and find. By and large, you should look ahead multiple weeks and be looking for streamers. Like, it doesn't really help you to know who your top guys have great matchups, but what it can help is if you're deciding between stashing this streaming quarterback or that streaming quarterback for 2 weeks down the line.
Yeah, and I think part of that, and this leads into what my second one was, which was stream your defenses and look now.
Mm-hmm.
I know we don't play with defenses anymore because we're not antiquated, but a lot of people still do. But you need to look ahead and see who has those favorable matchups for those. Who plays the Indianapolis Colts is probably a good one for your defense to look at.
The Houston Texans, the Denver Broncos, and the Chiefs play the Broncos twice in the next 4 weeks. And the Chiefs also play the Texans in that time span too. The Chiefs are a pretty good streaming defense, so you can probably pick up because they're going to get dropped against the Bengals this week.
Yep, there's a great one. Guys like the Steelers, even the Steelers are with Watt back have looked better. So look at streaming those options and kind of taking advantage of them as quickly as possible, and grab them. I mean, don't be afraid to stack 2 of them. Again, drop those ancillary pieces on your roster that you're not starting, you're not using, that aren't worth a position right now. Do you really need to hold Will Dissly? Do you really need to hold Jerry Jeudy? Like, are those guys that you're really going to be starting?
Oh, man, that hit me right in the heart that Jerry Jeudy is in that conversation. But he is. And, like, back to what I was saying about looking ahead for streamers, like Robert Tonyan, Packers have one of the easiest tight end schedules down the stretch. Like, I think it's probably full steam ahead for Robert Tonyan down the stretch. So I agree, position players and defenses for streamers, look ahead, play the matchups, and again, drop those ancillary pieces for guys that are going to have good matchups that can help you later on. Now, obviously, there's no guarantees that you're going to be still playing if you pick up a defense for week 16 and week 14, but they're the plan ahead. Just obviously make sure you don't drop an actual useful piece that you need to help get you there.
I mean, what's more satisfying than losing to somebody and then knowing they need the piece you picked up that they're going to need 2 weeks later?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into my next one, number 3. Pay attention to your opponent's roster. We don't really advise that type of thing throughout the season. And when I say pay attention to your opponent's roster, I mean, number 1, like you said, roster block them. If you've got an open roster spot and your opponent, let's say week 15, their quarterback goes down and maybe they have a really good quarterback to where they do not have a streamer as a backup, and you have a spot you can cycle through. You know what? Just go pick up the best tight end off waivers, and don't be afraid to spend more of your fab on that than what they have if you've got it, and block your opponent. So that's number 1. I'm definitely always looking for those kinds of moves. And then even like paying attention to your opponent's roster and setting your lineup to what you think you need that week. And what I mean by that is if you think you're playing a monster, which, I mean, everyone has projections. Everyone knows who's good at this point. Now, you don't know what's going to happen, but you at least know what the odds are. Have some idea going into your matchup. If you're projected to lose by 25 points, it's probably time to shoot the moon a little bit this week with your lineups. That doesn't mean get crazy and bench an actual good player for a guy that you saw score 25 points one time in week 11. That's not what we're saying. But benching a lower upside guy for a higher upside guy, or vice versa. If you're the monster team and you just kind of need that safety, then it's okay to play the guy that you feel great about getting 8 points as opposed to the guy that could get 2 points or could get 20 points on a given week if the matchup kind of dictates that for your team.
Yeah. And I think in part of that is the ability to roster block now is important. Even like I said, there's still going to be the Green Bay Packers and Arizona Cardinals who are on bye. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure a lot of people aren't looking at those matchups because that's 2 weeks from now, or a week from now, sorry, thinking how they're going to fill those roles. And if you're fighting for a playoff spot and someone has DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown, or Aaron Jones, now's the time to go get somebody off the waiver wire and not let them get the players they need and just going as far out. I mean, if your opponent also has like a defense that's good right now, that's going to be placing a lot, like the Ravens have a really tough schedule in the fantasy playoffs, and someone has the Ravens defense, which I could see them doing, I would not be opposed to picking up 4 defenses and watching your opponent have to start like the Lions, you know?
It's definitely a little dirty, a little low, but you know what? All we care about around here is W's at the end of the day.
We eat those W's.
All right, Dalton. Did you say your third, or do you still have a third that you need to give? I've lost track of where we've gone.
I mean, I have a few like redundant ones. Only hold one quarterback at this point. Like that's one of the ancillary roster spots you can drop. I did also just pick up Jameson Williams no matter what. And then just look at your kicker schedule and start thinking about streaming kickers too. Just trying to make sure I hit those points that no one wants to talk about.
God, I never want to think about kickers, but you're right that there are still plenty of people that play in leagues with kickers and obviously defenses that we talked about a little bit earlier, and that sadly can swing playoff matchups in big ways if you guess right in those.
It is unfortunate that is the case, that we still have to talk about kickers, but some people do it.
Okay, so let's move on to, we will call this our league winners draft. And basically what we said and kind of what I said earlier is we each have to draft 3 guys, a starter, a bench player, and then a waiver wire guy. And we'll do it a snake draft. I don't know if you want to go first, you want me to go first. So we'll do, I pick once, you pick twice, or vice versa. We'll go through it. Now, what I will say is we can take these in any order. You just need to have one of each by the end. So, like, for example, if you have a bench player that you're afraid I'm going to take and you want that guy as one of your 3, maybe you can take him number 1. Or, you know, if you have, like, I have a starter that I'm not too worried about you saying, so he's probably going to be my last pick as an example. So, do you want to go first, or you want to go 2 and 3? Uh-oh. Johnny might need you to hop back in here.
Yeah, wow. Did not expect Dalton to cut his feed. Yeah. That was interesting.
Oh, here he is. Hello, friend.
Hello, friends. There's
And we're back.
tab right next to my notes, and I might have clicked that. I will go ahead and go first.
Let me go first. You're not afraid I'm going to take your guy, huh?
I am, but I prepared for that.
No, I'm not going to take your guy. I don't want any part of him on my 3-man squad here. Let's see. I guess I should go with the guy I'm most worried about you taking. I'll go bench player Isaiah Pacheco. And we have this conversation. We're still classifying him as a bench player because he's only had like 2 weeks of 10 points now. And he is definitely not quite, although maybe he is now after 20 plus carries the other day, but he's not a locked and loaded starter by any means for fantasy teams that he's on. But the Chiefs really seem like they are trying to kind of let him cook a little bit, trying to get him involved in the offense and get him comfortable down the stretch to be their lead guy. They finally drew up a passing play for him the other day. That was very exciting. He rushed for a touchdown too. He also, after Aaron Donald did a very mean thing to Trey Smith, he also broke an Aaron Donald tackle, which was pretty impressive as well. So, not saying Pacheco is like a world beater, but I think Pacheco you could probably say is an above average running back, and above average running back in a Chiefs offense has great potential to be a league winner, even if the passing stuff is not there. I mean, I think the snaps were like 39 Pacheco, 31 McKinnon. And so that obviously proves, number 1, that McKinnon is not only the third down guy, but number 2, McKinnon is still the third down guy. And we saw why. Was it against the Jags? No, it was the Chargers, where Pacheco was pass blocking and he literally got ran over by Derwin James and got Mahomes sacked. And that is why he's not playing on those downs. So the upside may not be like Damian Williams down the stretch of the 2020 season or 2019 season. I guess it was the first Super Bowl run where he came in and was immediately a league winner. We don't have that kind of upside here, but I still think it's top 20, top 16 type of upside at running back. And I'm on Pacheco as being a very, very impactful guy down the stretch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not concerned about the Melvin Gordon signing. I think if anything, Melvin Gordon's going to factor into the passing game. Out of every Kansas City Chiefs player who's rushed the ball this year, excluding the wide receivers, obviously, Pacheco has like one EPA per rush added compared to everybody else who's in the negatives. So he's been the most efficient.
I assume you have to exclude the wide receivers because McCole Harbin probably is like actually insanely good in that stat.
Well, and Tony, actually.
Yeah,
they both are doing very well in that category. And we mentioned this earlier. The Denver Broncos currently have a very good defense, and I expect they'll continue to. But the Kansas City Chiefs play them twice, and there's a really high likelihood that we put up some points pretty quickly.
Well, and the Texans. So there's probably going to be a lot of opportunity, like there was the other day, for Pacheco to potentially rack up 20 plus carries.
Yeah, I think by win percentage alone, Kansas City has like the second easiest schedule going forward, and the hardest game is this week against the Bengals, and then it really starts to fall off. And I just say that because that's a really good opportunity to have the running back. Going into December, especially, the Chiefs are going to try to find ways to not make Mahomes throw for 400 yards a game and rush the ball 6-7 times. And Pacheco's shown to have the ability to hopefully close out games that the Chiefs have needed so frequently. And it's always good to have a running back in a top offense. For 5 weeks of the season, CEH was a top 5 running back based solely on touchdowns. And so Pacheco could do the same thing. I mean, there's no reason he can't.
Yeah, and CEH, even though he wasn't the third down back, was more involved in the passing game than Pacheco has been so far. Now, like I said, we did see Pacheco actually run a route, not from the backfield, like as an actual receiver, got motioned in and ran kind of an angle route and had a nice play. I'm going to make a prediction. I think sometime in the next couple of weeks, Pacheco is going to catch and break a screen pass for like a 40-yard touchdown. They're going to get him in the screen game a little bit on a third down where he doesn't have to be trusted to be the third down back. I think he's gonna break one because we see the speed and we see the anger that man runs with. Just get him in space once and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, the Chiefs are going to want to see what he has in the passing game before we get to the playoffs. I mean, that's just what any team's going to do. So I love it. I think he absolutely has that league winner archetype you're looking for. And the matchups really favor him going forward.
All right, you've got the next 2 picks.
All right, so I will go ahead and start with my waiver wire guy because I had 2 here, but I really wanted to get to talk about him again because he's available in 70% of leagues, and with good reason because he's on IR currently, and it's not Jameson Williams. You will not be hearing his name right now, but it is Khalil Herbert. So Khalil Herbert unfortunately dislocated his hip, got put on IR a couple weeks ago. He is slated to return week 15. So before your fantasy playoffs, right now, David Montgomery is handling the lion's share of the duties. We don't know whether Justin Fields will play again this season. The Bears clearly want to establish the run when Justin Fields isn't or is in the game. And Khalil Herbert has just shown he's better than David Montgomery. He was really working himself into a split. And it's also really rare you can get a guy that's, the secondary running back and could be the top running back on his team off waivers this late in the season. But with him going on IR, I'm sure a lot of owners dropped him, especially if they're making a late season push. So I love the idea of getting my hands on him. He's not a guy the Bears are going to back off of using to end the season. He's locked up with them for another 3 seasons. So Khalil Herbert is a guy that I love for going for on your waivers.
Yeah, I would say my only issue with that would be whether or not he actually comes back or not. But at the end of the day, all you're risking is a spot at the end of your roster. So it's not like you're spending a lot to go get the guy. So yeah, I think it's a worthwhile gambit. But like I said, I do worry about whether or not he'll be back because The Bears are playing for nothing but draft picks at this point. Now, I guess we'll see what they do with Fields these last couple of games if they actually play him. That may tell us a lot about their attitude of continuing to play guys down the stretch. But yeah, I don't hate going out and picking up Herbert and seeing what happens by any means. Who's your second guy up?
Since you already covered your bench guy, I'll just leave him for later. I'll go with starter. I'm going with Tony Pollard here.
Okay.
I think that Tony Pollard he's now getting the majority of the work.
You're not at all depressed that it was closer to a 50-50 snap share on Thanksgiving.
No, I'm not. And even then, his usage is way more intriguing. I mean, when he was getting like the 30-70 last year and still like fringe flex player with that usage, they weren't giving him the ball every snap. When he's in, he's touching the ball almost every time. He has like the third most receiving yards of any running back right now, I believe, which is incredibly hard to do. And
that's because like every fourth reception is a wheel route for a touchdown, it feels like, for Tony Pollard.
Which it's amazing what happens when you just use your running backs right. Looking at you, Washington. But he is just one step away from another Zeke injury, and the guy went nuclear the last time Zeke got injured.
Yep.
I don't think Zeke's still fully healthy. He's surviving his games on touchdown equity. And even if that continues, Tony Pollard is like, he is kind of what we thought DeAndre Swift was going to be to start this season, like in a timeshare, but being really effective with it.
Man, that one hurts. Swift is basically, you can't start him.
Exactly. Yeah. But Pollard is doing what we thought Swift was going to do, which is very efficient touches, ability to get in the red zone and involved in the passing down work in an offense that's actually clicking and needs receiving options because it's just the CD show at this point.
Yep. And I'll be curious, the game on Thanksgiving got out of hand and was so clearly, it was so clear the Cowboys were going to win that game about midway through the third quarter that they were able to give Zeke his token red zone touches and had his touchdowns. I'll be curious to see their first close game kind of post Zeke injury and post, Tony Pollard explosion for like the fifth time, but post big explosion this year. I'll be curious to see if Zeke is still handling all of those high leverage goal line touches or if Pollard will get more involved and be able to kind of work himself into their inside the 5 offense, which I think he should. Not that Zeke, that is probably one of the things he does best at this point is pick up the short yards, but not everything is going to be a third and goal on the 1. Sometimes you might have to get 3 yards, and in the NFL, it's not like college. You sometimes have to make guys miss and break tackles and just be more explosive than the other guy to score from 3 yards away.
Yep. So I'll be looking forward to that. But Evan, who's your next?
Okay, well, I've got the next 2, so it doesn't matter which order I do this. I'll save the starter for last. I think people are going to be mad at me for who I pick as my starter. For my waiver guy, I'm doing what I always talk about that I hate doing, and that's playing a little Shanahan roulette here and going Tyrion Davis-Price. I mean, there are a ton of options out there to go pick up. There are not many options with the upside of Davis-Price on your waivers. To be clear, I think it's him over Jordan Mason, although Jordan Mason Twitter hive, I see you, I hear you. I want to be in that hive very badly. I have him on my taxi squad on Dynasty, so I've been there. But we have obviously Elijah Mitchell done for 6 to 8 weeks, so for the rest of the fantasy relevant games and probably beyond that, to be frank. And then you have CMC, who, as of today, Wednesday, did not practice due to a knee irritation, and it sounds like something that he did in the game on Sunday. And I know Jordan Mason got the carries in that game and actually sealed the game for them late, but we kind of saw this movie earlier in the season that he's active in a special teams role as that third running back. In week 2, when it was basically just the 2 of them as running backs, it was 14 carries for TDP, and Jordan Mason didn't have a touch in that game. So I think he's going to immediately be the RB2 going forward, although it's a risky proposition to say I know for sure what's going to happen with this. I definitely don't. Like, if TDP is not available or you just aren't able to get him, like someone outbids you or it's already happened, they already outbid you, whatever. Like, go pick up Jordan Mason and just see. It's not the worst move. But for this pick, I'm taking Davis Price because we know the running game can be very profitable in this offense. And we know that the backup spot, which, by the way, Elijah Mitchell was getting his fair share of run behind McCaffrey. So even if McCaffrey doesn't miss time, I think Davis Price is going to get touches down the stretch. And, I mean, the Niners are a Super Bowl contender. They should be being careful with Christian McCaffrey down the stretch. So we'll see what McCaffrey's availability is going forward. All I know is this dude has done it to us the last 2 years, and I don't hate picking up his backup when he's clearly banged up right now.
Yeah, so I'm curious why you didn't pick Tevin Coleman up.
Yeah, even though I made the Tevin Coleman joke earlier, I think he's terrible. That's what I think.
Yes, I do like playing Shanahan roulette. I wouldn't mind rostering 2 of those running backs this week to see who pops off if I have the roster space.
Yeah.
Because clearly they're going to put someone behind Christian McCaffrey. And as we've seen in San Francisco for the last umpteen years with Kyle Shanahan, he loves to use players who aren't the stars on that team. Debo, George Kittle not getting red zone targets. Brandon Ayuk being a dud the first half of last season. So it's very possible that his love for TDP finally shows. The guy was a 3rd-round pick and got them to cut Trey Sermon, rest in peace. It was a 2nd-round pick.
Yeah, it's like former 2nd-round pick. So
yeah.
It's hard to say draft capital means too much, but they should at least – now, they shouldn't do it at the expense of winning games, but if the opportunity arises due to injury or just even if they are winning some of these games and have some carries to spare, some non-high leverage carries, like they should want to see what they have in TDP because they just, like you said, spent a 3rd-round pick on the guy. And I'm sure they're going to draft 2 more running backs in the draft next year. So we'll see if they actually have to spend 2 or 3 picks and free agent spots on running back next year, or maybe they actually have a guy that can stick as the RB2/RB3 when Elijah Mitchell is or isn't around.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing that sucks is it's Kyle Shanahan, so there might be a guy we don't know whose name is on the roster, and he'll be the one. Somehow
JaMychal Hasty is going to come back and get carries.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Off of the Jags. All right. My starter, I think if you have this guy, you're probably dead or close to dead. But just in case you're not, Dalton, I kind of think DJ Moore is going to be a league winner down the stretch.
I'm just not doing this. Is this a bit? Is this one of those things where you're like, oh, I don't know, who could I get going here?
No, like I know DJ Moore was one of my guys. He is, even though he's been the wide receiver 25 up to this point, the ride has been such to where he is not bringing wide receiver 25 value to your fantasy football team. But here's the thing. I mentioned that Athletic article earlier. The Panthers are tied for the 2nd easiest playoff wide receiver schedule. They play the Steelers, who give up and this is in the playoffs. They play the Steelers, who have given up the most points to receivers this year, the Lions, who are 6th, and the Bucks, who are giving up 33 points per game to receivers. And like I said, even though that wide receiver 25 has not helped you that much this year, he is still somehow the wide receiver 25 on the season. He's averaged 70 yards per game with Sam Darnold and PJ Walker, 35 yards per game with Baker Mayfield. So this is all on the stipulation of Baker Mayfield is not the one throwing him passes in any of these games. Per Adam Levitan, he's at about 16 points per game with Darnold and Baker, and about 10 points per game ish with Baker Mayfield. So it's been a big difference. I mean, this is a guy he's the only receiver in the NFL with 1,200 scrimmage yards in the last 3 seasons. Never got past 60 yards in a game with Baker. Sam Darnold is back for 1 game. DJ Moore immediately goes 4 receptions, 103 yards, and 1 touchdown. Like, I get it. I know he's been frustrating, but I think DJ Moore has the potential to be a league winner down the stretch with a nice matchup and Sam Darnold at quarterback. And he's going to finish as like the wide receiver 15. And we're going to have to, not that we're going to be anti DJ Moore, especially if the situation somehow improves, but we're going to have to at least remind people, hey, like he probably lost you your league before he did that last year.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those things where we're going to have to recap the fantasy ride and not just look at the fantasy numbers. Russell Wilson might end up a top 12 quarterback, but God forbid anybody drafts him.
Let's not get crazy.
Yeah, let's not get crazy. I don't mind it. The Panthers have an easy schedule. Sam Darnold looks to be their best quarterback right now. I guess Baker Mayfield is the death nail for wide receiver ones in any offense.
Yeah.
DJ Moore is also hyper talented, so I don't mind it. I just would be remiss to wonder if you're even viable to get to the playoffs at this point. If you still have the ability to trade, maybe go after the poor DJ Moore owner.
Yeah.
And see what's going on in their head.
Yep. And he may not be on a lot of playoff teams, but I mean, you never know. There's so many guys who hit, who like you could have drafted DJ Moore high, but also drafted Chris Olave or whatever, and you've kind of made up for that production through another guy. If you bail on DJ Moore early enough to not get burned by him too many times, it's possible he's alive in more leagues for playoff spots than we think. But yeah, I hate to do it again. I hate to be the DJ Moore guy again, but I just think there's a great chance that he's going to be one of the fantasy MVPs of the last 3 weeks of the season.
Disturbingly disgusting. Well, I'll go with my bench guy here. He's another name that's not like super sexy, but I'm going with Zay Jones. The Jaguars came out of the bye with a clear intention to involve him in their game. He had 14 targets into the week as the wide receiver 5. And he's pretty consistent this season when it comes to his involvement in the Panthers offense. And sorry, not the Panthers, the Jaguars. We're mixing our cats up on this podcast. But he's just been incredibly good for the Jaguars and what they need. He does a lot of their underneath stuff and their lower A-dot routes, while Christian Kirk is running a lot of their deeper stuff. On the season, he's wide receiver 34. But like post-bye, I was very impressed with Trevor Lawrence, and I really want a piece of that. And he's probably the player you can get. Marvin Jones is another guy in this offense who's kind of interesting, but not really. I think Zay Jones going forward is going to be a huge piece of it. He's one step away from an injury to Christian Kirk to being the wide receiver 1 in an offense that's kind of running and humming. And they get the Lions this week. Like, if there's a week for us to see whether or not Zay Jones is for real, it's this week. He's going to have a good matchup and a positive environment. And a surprisingly fun game to watch this week is going to be the Lions-Jaguars. So I love putting him on your bench because I think he could be one of those streaming wide receivers who, in the season as a top 24, and you look back, you're like, well, how did he get there?
I will say, so one thing he has working against him is the first 2 weeks of the playoffs, they get the Cowboys and the Jets, which I know, like, Jets by name, you might think that's a good matchup. The Jets have been a good defense this year. They do play Houston in week 17. So that may be your streaming opportunity right there. I will say with Zay Jones, I'm not saying you don't agree with this, but I just think he's just a guy. Like, he's been in the league since 2018 and never really been good. Like, he was in Vegas the last couple of years, and they desperately needed receiving help there. And he's about to have the best season of his career, to be clear. It's like he's having a good year, but he's never gotten above 652 yards. That was his rookie year line in Buffalo. So I want you
to talk to him after this week.
I just – he had 19 points in week 3, and then his next 3 games were 2.7, 6.7, and 8.8. So I just don't think, and again, not that none of these guys are like sure things to do what we're saying by any means, but I just feel like I would not be surprised if Zay Jones has had the good game. Maybe he plays well against the Lions too, and then just puts up a couple stinkers because he's just a guy who's kind of a journeyman wide receiver, where it's really you're just going to have to guess right for him on a given week. But I also understand the upside because I'm with you that I love what I saw from Trevor Lawrence. I think everybody who watched that game loved what they saw from Trevor Lawrence. And then I mentioned it, the week 17 matchup against Houston is definitely juicy.
It's happening. The Trevor Lawrence breakout is here.
All right, Dalton. Before we move on from this segment entirely, I kind of lost track of which ones you picked, so I didn't want to say a name and then have you say, okay, that was my guy. What the hell? But a waiver guy who I think that we haven't mentioned that you should probably just go pick up if you have a spot is Keontae Ingram. No more Eno Benjamin there. He's the clear James Conner backup. Need I say more? He's the clear James Conner backup.
What are you saying about James Conner?
I'm saying the guy has missed a little bit of time here and there.
Another guy I like, just mentioning the waivers, is Traylon Burks. He's still available in 50% of leagues and leads every game he's played. He's led the team in target share. So absolutely love the moonshot on him.
How would you like your first career touchdown to be picking up a fumble in the end zone?
It's Derrick Henry's fumble, though.
That's true. I mean, you pick up a Hall of Famer's fumble, I guess. But okay. All right, Dalton, we've got a little Who's That Pokemon to close us out. And, of course, before we actually get to it, got to play the song at least.
Who's that Pokemon?
All right, we've got two each. Do you want to go? You want me to go? How do you want to do this? Johnny, you can hop back in here.
Yeah, I can start, and I'll go first because the first one, I made a really concerted effort to leave all the numbers out this time for our lovely producer, Johnny Pham. So whenever we're ready, I'll go ahead and get this started. This guy is in the NFC.
Okay.
He's been a top 12 wide receiver the last 3 weeks. He just became the team's #1 pass option over the last 3 weeks. On the season, he's only run 56% of his team's routes, but over the last 2 weeks, he's above 80%. And the quarterback he's playing with is not elite.
Is not elite?
Not elite at all, no.
So it's not Joe Flacco?
No, it is not Joe Flacco.
Okay. It's, I don't want to say I stopped listening, but I stopped focusing halfway through because at a certain point you said something that made me think it was Chris Godwin. And then you said something else that made me think, okay, it's probably not him, but I couldn't get off of it. So I'm just going to get the Chris Godwin guess out of the way right now.
It is not Chris Godwin. And God forbid you say Tom Brady's not elite on this podcast.
Okay. Not elite, top 12 receiver the last 3 weeks. A guy that wasn't running that many routes early in the season, but is running.
I will say he was a healthy scratch a couple of games this season.
He was a healthy scratch a couple of games this season.
Yes. He was probably a borderline cut option at training camp.
Okay, it's not Brandon Ayuk. That would have been last year. Johnny, any guess? NFC? We're thinking NFC.
It's on a playoff team too, if that helps. It's the NFC, so like 17 of them are playoff teams, but
yeah, I have no idea. I'm actually lost.
Me too. I can't, like, everyone who I'm thinking of that's good. I can't think of anybody. It's tough to think of anybody who's good who has been through.
I didn't say this guy was good. He's just the top 12 wide receiver the last 3 weeks.
That's true, the last 3 weeks. But see, like, I don't know. Like this has the profile of this.
It's not a rookie. I'll keep giving you because this is a hard one.
Gotta see, Johnny. I make it easy. I try and make it so you guys have a chance. And look what Dalton.
I said, oh yeah, they had numbers. So and now it's probably the hardest one we've had.
You guys want to hear it?
I do not actually want to hear it. I want to keep stalling. Johnny, do you have a guess?
Is it Brandon Ayuk?
It is not Brandon Ayuk.
Is it Brandon Ayuk from 2021, like I already said earlier?
It could be Brandon Ayuk from 2021.
Okay. Oh, man. I mean, Darius Slayton, that's my final guess.
It's Darius Slayton.
Wow.
Oh, dang it. I thought I was going to get you.
I was really stumbling through playoff teams with bad receiving rooms. I was like, oh, the Giants clearly need to be where I'm looking.
Yeah, when I sat down for this week, I was like, I'm going to get a Giants receiver in here just for fun, see if they can't figure it out. But yeah, it's Darius Slayton. Surprisingly, he's a wide receiver 11 over the last 3 weeks coming out of the Giants bye. And he was the guy they talked about trading in the offseason.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess part of it is they trade Kadarius Toney, and that opens up some time for him. But like Kadarius Toney wasn't even playing anyway, so I can't really Like Wendell Robinson was obviously in and out and then back in and tore his ACL. So now he's permanently out. So that obviously has opened up some more time. But he's just one of the few guys on the team that can actually, for lack of a better way of putting this, be a receiver, like run routes down the field and catch deep passes, not just be a guy that they run a play action boot for and throw a pass 2 yards downfield.
And is outperforming Kenny Galladay.
Oh God, I almost forgot Kenny Galladay existed. Okay, my first one here. I'll give us a who's that Pokemon for all.
Who's that Pokemon?
All right, this guy's a quarterback in the AFC. Since week 6, he is the QB7. QB9 in points per game over that time. And I had to remove 2 fake guys in front of him, Teddy Bridgewater, Mike White. I'm sorry, your one game doesn't count for this, unfortunately. But even though he's been a top 10 quarterback for the last 6 weeks, people don't seem to be fully bought into him as a fantasy starter. I looked at Fantasy Pros rest of season ranks before we hopped on. He is not inside the top 12 at quarterback in rest of season ranks. And he's behind guys like Tom Brady, who I know we joked about, and not that he's not good, but he's not been Tom Brady. The Bucs have not been the Bucs. That's pretty common knowledge at this point. And Kirk Cousins, who can give you literally 1 point or 20 points. You just don't quite know with him. Whereas this guy has finished inside the top 12 in 5 of his last 6 games. Any guesses?
What division?
I'm not giving you a division, just
AFC, NFC. Oh, AFC.
I have a couple more hints I can run through.
I mean, we were giving him praise earlier. Is it Trevor Lawrence?
See, I knew as soon as Trevor Lawrence got brought up, because I guessed. I wanted to talk about Lawrence, and of course you brought him up. But he ranks in the top half of the league in accuracy rating, true completion percentage, pressure completion percentage, play action completion percentage, and he's number 6 in that, by the way. Maybe run some more play action. Jacksonville, red zone completion percentage, and true pass rating. He's also 7th at the position in EPA. And I mean, this is a guy last year, he had 8 games of 5 carries or more. He only has 3 this year, so he's doing less running. Maybe the running can pick up down the stretch and he can be even more valuable, but I don't really see why he's not a top 12 quarterback rest of season, which Fantasy Pros has him 14 right now, which is fringe, but we've talked about the struggle of finding guys past that top tier of quarterback. Like I think Trevor Lawrence is one of those guys.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There are people out there still trying to make Russell Wilson a thing this season, Derek Carr a thing this season. As far as like pocket passing goes, he's one of those guys you want. I might feel more comfortable with him than Kirk Cousins in a lot of situations right now.
I will say you're still playing matchups with him. Like we talked about the Jags schedule earlier. I'm not starting him unless he's just played unbelievable these next couple of weeks. But I'm probably not starting him in week 1 of my playoffs against the Cowboys. But I'm probably not going to be scared off by the Jets matchup if I'm in a spot where I need to use them. And then obviously the Houston matchup you feel great about.
No wonder you knew Zay Jones matchup so well. I was like, man, he was really prepared for this one.
I was just getting Trevor Lawrence like an hour before I got on here. So yeah, I was all over that. All right, Dalton.
Who's that Pokemon?
All right, we're back to numbers, Johnny. Starting off, this guy's in the NFC. He is a wide receiver.
I like these numbers so far. Keep going. Oh, Max is a fan too.
Max, I think we have mail. This guy does have the dog in him as well.
Okay.
He is a top 12 wide receiver this season. He's 24% in targets per route run on his team, with 41% of the team's targets 28% of the team's targets and 41% of the team's air yards. So this guy is doing a great job right now. Any guesses?
You say he's in the NFC?
Yes.
NFC top 12 receiver. I mean, there can't. I think we just had CD Lamb last week.
Is it AJ Brown?
I was gonna say AJ Brown's my guess.
It's AJ Brown.
AJ Bum. Okay, good to know. Should have known he was gonna drop that little nugget in there.
It is AJ Brown, who just continues to be so successful and the guy I'm just loving to watch in the NFL.
Have you ever puked so hard that you popped a blood vessel in your eye? Because that's what AJ Brown did before their game last weekend.
Got the dog in him. He was puking that dog up.
Lost 7 pounds, he said.
Yeah, and still scored a touchdown.
He did.
Fumbled.
That's true.
Well, have you ever popped a blood vessel? That's what I thought.
I've never fumbled, so there's real no comparison
Fair.
there.
I mean, who's to say Giant would fumble if he got tackled by an NFL player?
I've seen you fumble mini bags.
All right. We've got one more guy before we get out of here.
Who's that Pokemon?
I guess you're NFC, I'm AFC today. I am AFC for the second guy as well. He's a running back. He is outside of the top 30 this year, averaging just under 8 points per game. He has never averaged below 9 points per game any other year of his career. He only has 2 games in double digits this season and has not reached double digits for basically 2 months. At this point, he has more games outside the top 50 than inside the top 20 this season. And he just forget only reaching double digits twice this year. It hasn't happened for a month. So it's only happened twice. Hasn't happened for a month. His ADP, though, was in the top 100. I know you know who this is, but I feel
it's because you let it up earlier. You talked about this team earlier.
Who is it?
It's Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, it's Kareem Hunt. And see, both of my guys got mentioned earlier in the show. It's such crap. His ADP, top 100, ahead of guys like Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, Brandon Ayuk, Kenneth Walker. This is finally the year that Kareem Hunt's not paying off in a big way for people that drafted him. I mean, you look at his career averages throughout his career, 12.4 points per game, 12.5 points per game. The 9.2 points per game, the closest to this year, was the year that he came back midway through the season after being suspended. So his first year in Cleveland. And then you go back to Kansas City, obviously, 19.8, which I kind of forget how good he was in those first 11 games before everything went wrong, obviously. And then 16.8 points per game as a rookie. I just thought it was worth noting that I feel like we haven't really talked about it much. But, I mean, Kareem Hunt hasn't gotten double-digit touches, let alone double-digit points in most of the Browns games this season. And he, at this point, I think he has to be thought of as a high-end handcuff, like probably the number one handcuff. I don't think you can start Kareem Hunt right now.
No, I agree. I mean, and the Nick Chubb breakout is more than welcome on this podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, he's just been playing out bad. He was a guy who I really thought was going to be traded at the trade deadline. If you are, I mean, you have to roster him still because if Nick Chubb gets hurt, he's a top 5 guy.
Oh, of course. I mean, he's the number one guy in the conversation of guys we were talking about earlier.
And your new hope is going to have to be Deshaun Watson brings this offense into a different realm.
Yep. And that's what I was going to say is at least the X factor is we don't know how Deshaun Watson is going to look. We know he didn't look great in week 1 of the preseason or whatever week of the preseason he played. And he's obviously missed a ton of time. There's not a ton of precedent for guys missing so much time and coming back. So it's just hard to say, but there is at least a ceiling that didn't exist before. But I think for now, it's got to be a wait and see. And I think if you were to think about starting Hunt in 2 weeks in your playoffs, he would have to have shown you multiple good weeks in a row, I think, to earn that trust.
I mean, you better not be starting him in your playoffs. If you are, you were down real bad, and you didn't listen to our advice to pick up a bunch of handcuffs.
Probably, although you never know. You never know what type of injuries can creep up. All right, we've got 2 questions in chat that I wanted to touch on very quickly before we get out of here. Start 1 at your flex, half point per reception, and this is a must win to make the playoffs. Mike Evans or Cortland Sutton, and then Trevor Lawrence or Kirk Cousins. And he parentheses, which is a very important note. Mike Evans is playing Lattimore for the Saints this week.
That is a very important note. Historically, that does not work out well for Mike Evans. But but I'm going Mike Evans.
I think if you're going down, you have to go, even though both teams have been going down plenty this year, I think you have to go down with the Bucks and Mike Evans over Russell Wilson and the Broncos and Cortland Sutton. The Broncos, who are literally the worst offense of the last 20 years.
Yes. Well, and just to add to that, I'm not a big narrative street guy, but Mike Evans literally got ejected and suspended for a game for defending Tom Brady against Marshawn Lattimore and the Saints last time they played this season.
Mhm.
And if there's ever a time for Tom Brady, who is definitely a guy who likes to try to make statements to make a statement, it is over targeting Mike Evans in this game and trying to prove a point to the New Orleans Saints. And again, I mean, skill to skill, Evans is better. Brady's better. Like, even if the Bucs offense is anemic this year, the Denver Broncos are just so bad.
Yes.
And then I'm going with Lawrence in that matchup. I mean, I said it earlier, but Lions, Jags, like, that's going to be a shootout. It is a very, very juicy matchup for Trevor Lawrence to play the Lions. I think it's easy. I don't know who the Vikings play. I haven't even looked. But
I'm looking right now. They play the Jets. So, like I said earlier, Jets aren't a gimme matchup by any means.
No, I'm 100% going away from Kirk Cousins anytime I can.
Yep, I would lean into Lawrence and that Lions matchup this week as well. Last question: trade Deshaun Watson for Mike Evans and Jamar Chase. This is a 2-quarterback league. He already has Burrow and Josh Allen. Yes, 1,000 times yes. You have clearly made it this far on the strength of 2 very good quarterbacks. You're out of their buys. Like, I know it's a risk if one of them gets hurt, but you're trading a receiver who's underperformed and a quarterback you literally have not had all year for a guy who could be a potential league winner. I would imagine, or not potential league winner, is a league winner as long as he plays. What I would say is, if you're having any second thoughts, I'm assuming it's about the health. And if you want to be cautious, as long as that trade's not going to go away, as long as Chase isn't going to get dealt, as long as your deadline isn't literally today, you can wait a couple more days and just make sure Chase is still on track to play and everything, kind of seems okay from a health standpoint. But you're probably still going to have to take a little bit of a leap there.
Yeah, and I just want to be as far away from Deshaun Watson. I know, like, this isn't fantasy analyst, good analyst, but his preseason game he played, he was like 0 for 8 completions. 10 of the accusers in the sexual assault allegations will be at the stadium. Like, it's very bad optics for the NFL, and we know the NFL just occasionally does things to make themselves look better. And I wouldn't be surprised if after a game the optics look worse. Roger Goodell comes out and there's another suspension levied against him if any other allegations come forward. I would try to get off Deshaun Watson no matter what, because I just feel like that's always going to be a ticking time bomb going forward.
Allegations aside, which from a fantasy perspective, obviously we have to do that. From a real life perspective, they're obviously terrible and all of that stuff. But it's kind of like what we were talking. Like, you can think of Deshaun Watson kind of in the same way as a handcuff running back, or as a backup receiver. Sorry, and you can think of it like you're basically holding a backup who you've been stashing all season. You're only going to start him if one of your 2 guys gets hurt. And you're trading him for a guy who literally could be the wide receiver 1 the rest of the way, because kind of not so quietly, the Bengals offense is looking really, really good the last couple of weeks. And Jamar Chase is only going to add to that when he comes back.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Anything else to add before we get out of here?
No, I think that's all.
All righty, that is going to do it for episode 93 of the Half Point Per Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, also Half Point Per Podcast on YouTube. The link to all of these things in the show notes. As always, we will respond to questions in the chat on the YouTube channel during the show as well. So that's one benefit of doing that there. The show is obviously available anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. I hear that Spotify has like this cool Spotify Wrapped thing that maybe if you listen to our podcast enough, it might show up next year. So if it works for you, you can give that a shot. Thank you guys, as always, so much for listening. Best of luck in what is surely a lot of must-win matchups everywhere. And we will talk to you guys. Johnny and Dalton will talk to you guys, I should say, next week. And I will be back the week after that.